Ethan Walker had spent years trapped in the relentless cycle of city life, long hours, crowded streets, and a dream that always seemed just out of reach. But the moment he signed the papers for the 50-acre farm on the outskirts of town, he knew he had finally made it. This wasn't just a purchase, it was the culmination of every sacrifice, every late night, every dollar saved. The land stretched out in rolling green fields, a sturdy old farmhouse standing tall against the sky, a barn that just needed a little fixing up. It was his. Every inch of it. He had earned this. Moving from the hustle of the city to the slow rhythm of country life was an adjustment, but Ethan welcomed the change. Early mornings brought the scent of fresh earth and cool, misty air. The quiet was almost surreal, broken only by the occasional chirp of birds or the rustling of leaves in the wind. The town itself was small, charming in its own way, though it didn't take long for him to realize that privacy was a rare commodity here. People waved at him in the street, asked too many questions, and seemed to have an uncanny interest in his farm. He chalked it up to small-town curiosity, until the day she arrived. It was early, the sun barely creeping over the horizon, when Ethan first spotted her. A woman marching across his field with the kind of confidence that suggested she owned the place. A tiny white dog trotted at her heels, yipping excitedly as she made a beeline toward him. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead, setting down the wooden plank he had been carrying. The woman didn't introduce herself. She didn't offer a smile, a handshake, nothing. Instead, her sharp eyes swept over him, assessing, judging. "This land has always been open to the community," she said, arms crossed, her voice firm and matter-of-fact. "We walk our dogs here. Kids play here. We even hold town events in the back field. So, of course, we expect that to continue." Ethan blinked. Was she serious? I'm sorry, but this is private property," he said, forcing a polite tone. "I bought this land fair and square. I have the deed and everything." She let out a short, condescending laugh, tilting her head like he was some naive fool. "Oh, honey," she drawled, "you don't understand how things work around here. Just because you bought the land doesn't mean you get to change how things have always been done." Ethan's patience wavered. He had worked too damn hard for this, dreamed too long to have some stranger waltz onto his land and tell him what he could and couldn't do with it. He took a deep breath. "I understand that people might have had access before, but that was when someone else owned it. I'm the owner now, and I'd prefer if people respected that." Her expression barely shifted, but something dark flickered in her eyes. "We'll see about that," she said smoothly, a slow smirk curling at the corner of her lips. And just like that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her little dog prancing after her as if she had just settled something in her favor. Ethan watched her go, unsettled but dismissive. Just a nosy neighbor with a sense of entitlement, he figured. He had no idea what was coming. Ethan didn't think much of the encounter at first. He figured the woman, Karen Monroe, as he later learned, was just one of those people who didn't like change. She'd grumble for a bit, maybe complain to a few neighbors, and then move on. He was wrong. The next morning, as he sipped his coffee on the porch, he noticed movement in the distance. A group of people, three older women and a man walking a large black lab, were strolling across his fields as if they owned the place. They waved at him, cheerful and oblivious. Ethan set his mug down and made his way over, his boots crunching against the damp grass. "Morning," he called, keeping his voice even. "Can I help you?" One of the women smiled, completely unfazed. "Oh, we're just out for our morning walk, dear. Been doing this for years." Ethan forced a polite smile. "I understand that, but this is private property now. I'd appreciate it if you respected that." The man frowned. "Karen told us the land was still open to the town." "Of course, she did." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Karen was mistaken," he said firmly. I own this land now, and I need people to stay off of it. The group exchanged uneasy glances. One of the women muttered something under her breath before they slowly turned and wandered away, but Ethan had a sinking feeling this wasn't over. He was right. Over the next few days, the trespassing continued. Joggers cut through his property, children played in the fields, and dog walkers let their pets roam freely. Every time he asked them to leave, the answer was always the same, ***. Karen said it was fine. By the end of the week, Ethan was livid. He hadn't moved out here to babysit a bunch of entitled town folk who thought they could do whatever they wanted. He needed to confront Karen directly. Late one afternoon, he finally got his chance. She was standing near his barn, arms crossed, watching as two teenagers ran across his field, kicking a soccer ball back and forth. Ethan stormed over, his frustration bubbling over. "Karen," he said sharply. She turned, unfazed by his anger. "Yes. What the hell is going on?" He pointed toward the kids. "Why are people still treating my farm like a public park?" Karen tilted her head, feigning innocence. "I already told you. This land has always been open to the community. You can't just waltz in and change that." "Yes, I can," Ethan snapped. "Because it's my land, I bought it. I have the paperwork. You don't get to decide what happens here." Her eyes darkened, but her voice remained calm. "You may have legal papers," she said, "but there's something more important than that. ***tradition, ***. This town has always had access to this land, and the people won't take kindly to an outsider trying to change that." Ethan stepped closer. "Tradition doesn't override ownership, Karen. If you or anyone else steps foot on my property again without permission, I'll call the cops." For the first time, a flicker of annoyance crossed her face, but then she smiled, a slow, knowing smirk. "Go ahead," she said smoothly. "Let's see how that works out for you." Ethan had no idea what she meant by that. The next morning, flashing red and blue lights filled his driveway. He barely had time to grab his boots before stepping outside to find two uniformed officers approaching his porch, their patrol car idled, its red and blue lights cutting through the early morning mist. "Morning, officers," Ethan said cautiously. "What's going on?" One of the officers, a tall man with a stern expression, glanced at his notepad. "We received a complaint from a local resident, Karen Monroe, stating that you were unlawfully restricting access to community land." Ethan exhaled sharply. "This isn't community land. It's my property. I have the deed inside if you need proof." The second officer, a woman with a more neutral demeanor, nodded. "We're not here to accuse you of anything, Mr. Walker. We just need to clear up what's going on. According to Ms. Monroe, this land has historically been open to the public." "That may be what she claims, but it's not true," Ethan countered. "The previous owner allowed access at his discretion, he never gave up ownership rights. I bought this land legally, and I have every right to enforce my boundaries." A rustling noise caught his attention. Karen had been lurking at the edge of the property, arms crossed, watching the exchange with a smug expression. "This land has belonged to this town for decades," she said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "Just because you waved some money around doesn't mean you can take that away." Ethan felt his blood pressure spike. "That's exactly what it means, Karen. I own this land. You don't, ***. The first officer sighed. "All right, let's not turn this into a shouting match. Do you have the paperwork on hand, Mr. Walker?" Ethan nodded and disappeared inside, returning moments later with a thick folder. He handed it over, watching as the officers examined the deed, property lines, and transaction records. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the female officer handed the folder back. "This seems pretty cut and dry," she said, turning to Karen. "Mr. Walker is the legal owner. If he doesn't want people on his property, that's his right." Karen's face turned red. So you're just going to ignore the fact that this land has always been used by the town? He can't just move in and act like he owns the place. The male officer gave her a measured look. He does own the place, Ms. Monroe. Ethan crossed his arms. So does that mean I can press trespassing charges if people keep coming onto my land? Karen gasped as if personally offended by the idea. The officers exchanged glances before the male officer spoke. If you can prove repeated trespassing despite your warnings, then yes, you could take legal action. Karen looked like she was about to explode. This isn't over, she hissed before storming off. Ethan watched her go, his fists clenched at his sides. He had won this round, but something in Karen's expression told him that she was just getting started. Ethan had barely settled into the satisfaction of winning that round when the real battle began. If he had thought Karen was just an overbearing neighbor with a warped sense of entitlement, he quickly learned otherwise. This wasn't just about trespassing anymore. Karen was waging a war of perception, twisting reality into a version where she was the town's guardian, and he was the villain. It started with whispers. He'd walk into town for supplies, and conversations would halt the moment he stepped inside a store. People avoided eye contact or watched him with suspicion, muttering under their breath. When he stopped by the local hardware store to pick up supplies, the owner, a man who had been perfectly friendly before, stood stiffly behind the counter and refused to meet his gaze. "Sorry, Ethan," he muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "We, don't have what you're looking for." Ethan frowned. "I called yesterday. You said it was in stock." The man sighed, glancing toward the back of the store before lowering his voice. "Look, I don't want any trouble," Karen said. Ethan slammed his hand on the counter. "Karen doesn't own this store." "You do. So tell me the truth, do you have the supplies or not?" The man hesitated for a long moment, then shook his head. "You should leave, Ethan." That's when it hit him. Karen wasn't just stirring up gossip, she was controlling people. She had influence over local businesses, and she was using it to starve him out. His grocery orders were mysteriously cancelled. A local lawyer refused to take his case, citing a conflict of interest. He was being systematically cut off from the community. Then came the flyers. They were plastered on telephone poles, shop windows, even outside the diner. "Outsiders are destroying our community. Ethan Walker stole our land. We will not be silenced." Ethan ripped one down, his hands shaking with rage. Karen had taken their dispute public. She wanted him humiliated. Then, just when he thought she couldn't sink any lower, she did. It was a quiet afternoon, and Ethan was working near the barn when he saw movement near the edge of his property. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, wandered onto his land, looking nervous but determined. Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward him. "Hey, kid. You lost?" The boy hesitated before shaking his head. Karen said. "Karen said it's okay if I play here." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Well, it's not, bud. This is my farm, and you need to go back home, all right?" The kid nodded quickly and scurried off. Something about the whole thing felt off. Then, the next morning, he found a video of himself circulating online. The headline read, "Local farmer threatens child over public land dispute." Ethan clicked on the link, his stomach sinking. It was a heavily edited video. The footage made it look like he was towering over the child, scolding him, waving his hands aggressively. The nervous glance the boy had given the camera suddenly made sense. Karen had set him up. The comments were brutal. What kind of person threatens a kid? This is who we let into our town. Karen's right, he doesn't belong here. Ethan clenched his fists, rage boiling beneath his skin. He had never threatened that kid. But the damage was done. The town was turning against him. Enough was enough. He called Lauren Mitchell, the one lawyer who wasn't afraid to go against Karen. When he explained everything, she laughed bitterly. "You're not the first person she's pulled this on," she said. "But I'll tell you what, you might be the one to finally take her down." Ethan leaned forward. "Then let's do it." Lauren wasted no time. Within hours, she and Ethan were poring over town records, searching for anything Karen might have manipulated to support her ridiculous claim. What they found was staggering. Karen had altered old land registry files, making it appear as though the farm had been part of the town's shared property decades ago. But the truth? The land had always been privately owned, the previous owner had simply allowed people to use it informally, and Karen had twisted that into an unofficial entitlement. That was just the beginning. Lauren dug deeper, uncovering financial records, shady property deals, and council minutes that painted a much darker picture. Karen had been exploiting small-town politics for years. She had pressured elderly residents into selling land for a fraction of its value, convincing them that their properties were worthless before flipping them for profit. She had siphoned off town funds for community projects that never materialized. She had used her influence to manipulate town leadership, ensuring that anyone who opposed her would be shut out, ridiculed, or driven away. Lauren leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. "She's not just a bully. She's a crook." Ethan exhaled. "Then let's make sure everyone knows it." They compiled a mountain of evidence, testimonies from previous landowners who confirmed Karen's deceit, financial discrepancies that suggested she had misused town money, and most importantly, proof that her claims about the farm were completely baseless. The next step was getting the town to listen. Lauren sent formal complaints to the county office, demanding an official investigation into Karen's financial dealings. Meanwhile, Ethan and his new ally, Hank Grady, the town's land surveyor, went door to door, talking to longtime residents. Some were hesitant to speak out, but others, especially those Karen had wronged in the past, were finally ready to tell the truth. Then, just as their case was coming together, Karen made her biggest mistake yet. Ethan was reviewing documents with Lauren and Hank one evening when his phone buzzed with a security alert. He pulled up the camera feed, and his stomach dropped. Karen was back, but this time, she wasn't alone. A group of at least 10 people stood at the edge of his property, armed with bolt cutters, shovels, and rope. They were cutting through his fence, digging into his land as if staking a claim. Ethan's blood ran cold. "She's trying to take the land by force." Lauren grabbed her phone. "I'm calling the cops." Ethan wasn't going to wait. He grabbed his keys, sped down the dirt road, and arrived just in time to see Karen standing in the middle of his field, directing the group like some deranged general. He threw the truck into park, jumped out, and stormed toward them. "You have 5 seconds to get off my land before I have you all arrested," he said, his voice booming through the night. Karen turned slowly, her expression filled with pure arrogance. "This land belongs to the town," she declared. "We're taking it back." Ethan pulled out his phone. "You're all on camera. Every single one of you." Some of the town's people hesitated. One of them, a middle-aged man holding a shovel, muttered, "I thought this was legal." That's when the police sirens cut through the night. The cops pulled up fast, lights flashing, engines roaring. Officers jumped out, their hands resting on their holsters as they scanned the scene. Deputy Collins stepped forward, his patience clearly exhausted. "We got a report of trespassing and vandalism." His eyes swept over the cut fence, the broken posts, then landed on Karen. "Why am I not surprised?" Karen lifted her chin, defiant. "We are reclaiming what is rightfully ours." Collins sighed. "Karen, this was settled in court. You lost. Ethan Walker owns this land. You and everyone here are trespassing." Karen spun around, desperate. "Don't listen to them. We have a right to this land." One of the older men in the group, Frank Dawson, shook his head. "Karen, maybe we should go." Karen turned on him like a wild animal. "You coward, this is what they want. For us to roll over and give up. Collins had heard enough. That's enough, Karen. He gestured to the officers, cuff her. Karen's eyes widened. Wait. What, you can't arrest me. I'm standing up for this town. Collins muttered, you're standing up for yourself. As the handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists, Karen shrieked. No. No, no, no. This isn't how it's supposed to go. The townspeople backed away, some looked guilty, others just looked relieved. Collins turned to Ethan. Do you want to press charges? Ethan didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Karen was dragged toward the squad car, kicking and screaming. As the door slammed shut, the spell she had cast over the town finally broke. People whispered, some shook their heads, realizing they had been duped. Ethan crossed his arms. Looks like it's over. Hank clapped him on the shoulder. Yeah, kid. It's over. The aftermath of Karen's downfall rippled through the town like a long-overdue reckoning. With her arrest, everything she had built, the influence, the fear, the iron grip she held over the community, crumbled overnight. The people who had once blindly followed her were suddenly forced to face the truth. They had been manipulated, bullied, and used. Some came forward with their own stories, admitting they had never questioned Karen's word because it was easier to fall in line than to fight back. Others, ashamed of their part in her campaign against Ethan, approached him with awkward apologies, trying to salvage whatever goodwill remained. But Ethan wasn't in a hurry to forgive. He had spent months battling not just Karen, but an entire town that had been conditioned to believe her lies without question. He had been harassed, slandered, and pushed to his breaking point, all because one woman refused to let go of power. And for what? To maintain the illusion that she was the town's gatekeeper, the ultimate authority over land that was never hers to begin with? She had lost everything, and she had no one to blame but herself. As expected, the full investigation into her finances unearthed even more corruption. Town funds that had mysteriously disappeared. Land deals that had left elderly homeowners destitute. The fraudulent documents she had used to try and claim Ethan's property. The charges stacked up, and by the time her case went to trial, she wasn't just facing trespassing charges, she was looking at years behind bars. When the verdict was announced, the last of her remaining supporters quietly faded away, unwilling to defend a woman who had turned out to be nothing more than a fraud and a thief. With Karen gone, the tension in town slowly dissipated. Businesses reopened their doors to Ethan. Neighbors who had once glared at him from across the street now offered hesitant nods of acknowledgement. It would take time, but the divide Karen had created was beginning to heal. One evening, as he sat on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun dip behind the rolling hills of his farm, his phone buzzed. It was Lauren. Guess what? She said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Karen's moving. Far away. Ethan grinned. Good. For the first time in months, he felt at peace. The land was his. The fight was over. But the question remained, how had Karen gotten away with it for so long? How many other small towns had their own Karens, dictating who belonged and who didn't, twisting the rules to serve their own interests? Have you ever been caught in a battle against a power-hungry HOA, a nightmare neighbor, or someone like Karen? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.